Kofi sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair of the fertility clinic, his fingers tapping against his thigh in an agitated rhythm. Beside him, his wife Zainab stared at her hands, counting the lines on her palms as if they held answers. The doctor had just delivered the same message for the 5th consecutive year. There was still no sign of pregnancy. Her tests were normal, the scans showed nothing wrong, but somehow, month after month, the pregnancy never came. Outside the clinic window, Lagos bustled with life. Cars honked their impatient horns, vendors called out to customers, and somewhere in the distance, a baby cried. The sound made Zainab flinch. She glanced at her husband, hoping to see some reassurance in his face, but Kofi was already looking away, his jaw clenched so tightly that she could see the muscle working beneath his skin. They drove home in silence. The radio played a popular high-life song, but neither of them heard it. Zainab kept her eyes on the road ahead, watching the familiar streets of Lagos pass by. They had moved to this city 5 years ago when Kofi's business began to flourish. He had opened a successful import-export company, and for a while, everything seemed perfect. They had a beautiful home, a nice car, money in the bank. But there was one thing they did not have, and that one thing was beginning to destroy everything else. Kofi's mother, Mama Amma, lived with them in the large family house. She was a strong woman with a loud voice and even louder opinions. From the moment Zainab and Kofi married, she had begun asking about grandchildren. At first, the questions were gentle. "When will I hold my grandchild?" she would ask with a smile. But as the years passed, the questions became accusations. "What kind of woman cannot give her husband children?" she would say when she thought Zainab could not hear, but Zainab always heard. Kofi's extended family made things worse. During family gatherings, his uncles would pull him aside and whisper things. His cousins would make jokes that were not really jokes. His sisters would visit and speak to Zainab in voices filled with pity, as if she were already a failure. Even the women in the neighborhood began to talk. Zainab could feel their eyes on her when she went to the market. She heard the whispers following her like shadows. The pressure on Kofi was immense. In their culture, a man's worth was measured by his ability to have sons. A man without children was seen as incomplete, even cursed. His friends began to ask him questions too. They made suggestions about traditional healers and spiritual solutions. Some hinted that perhaps Zainab was not the right woman for him, that maybe he should consider taking another wife. These suggestions planted seeds of doubt in Kofi's mind, seeds that grew larger and stronger with each passing month of disappointment. At night, Kofi would lie awake in bed, listening to Zainab cry softly into her pillow. He wanted to comfort her, but instead he found himself growing angry at her. It was not rational, but anger rarely is. He blamed her body for betraying them both. He blamed her for not being able to give him what his family demanded. He blamed her for the embarrassment he felt when his friends asked about children. And most of all, he blamed her for the way his mother looked at him with disappointment, as if he had somehow failed to choose the right woman. Zainab had tried everything. She had visited doctors, both Western and traditional. She had drunk herbal remedies that tasted like dirt and bitter leaves. She had worn special beads and amulets blessed by spiritual leaders. She had kept strict diets, taken vitamins, followed every piece of advice anyone had ever given her. She had prayed every single day, falling on her knees and begging God to give her a child. Nothing worked. And with each failed attempt, her spirit broke a little more. One evening, about 5 years into their marriage, Kofi came home from work in a terrible mood. His business had faced some difficulties that day, and his mother had spent the afternoon criticizing Zainab for not having prepared his favorite meal properly. He found Zainab in the kitchen, preparing dinner for the evening. When she heard him enter, she turned with a hopeful smile, but the look in his eyes made her smile fade. "I cannot do this anymore," Kofi said, his voice cold and final. The words hung in the air between them like a curse. Zainab's hands began to shake. She did not ask what he meant because deep down she already knew. She had sensed it coming like a storm on the horizon. The distance between them had been growing wider each day. The conversations that used to flow easily had become stilted and painful. The touch of his hand, which once brought her comfort, now felt heavy with resentment. "What are you saying?" she whispered, though she knew exactly what he was saying. Kofi turned away from her. "I am saying that this marriage is over. I cannot be with a woman who cannot give me children. I cannot watch my family's disappointment anymore. I cannot listen to my mother's complaints. I cannot live with this shame." The words fell like stones into a still pond, creating ripples of devastation. Zainab gripped the counter to steady herself, feeling as though the ground beneath her feet had disappeared. Tears began to flow down her face, but she did not make a sound. She simply stood there, breaking silently while the man she had loved with all her heart spoke about ending their marriage as if he were discussing the weather. Within 2 weeks, Kofi had initiated divorce proceedings. He was efficient about it, using a lawyer to handle the details. Zainab did not fight him. She had no energy to fight. She simply packed her belongings into a few suitcases, clothes, books, a few photographs, and left the house that had become her prison. As she stood outside the home on her last day, she turned back to look at it one final time. The beautiful house that had once represented her dreams of a happy life now felt like a tomb. She thought about the nursery she had decorated in her mind, the children she had imagined having, the future she had believed they would share. All of it was gone. Zainab took a taxi to her sister's house, where she would stay until she figured out what to do next. As the car drove through the streets of Lagos, taking her away from everything familiar, she felt completely hollow inside. The community would soon know what had happened. They would judge her, blame her, pity her. She was infertile. She was a failure as a wife. She was, in the eyes of her culture, incomplete. But what Zainab did not know yet was that this ending was not actually an ending. It was a beginning. Though the pain was unbearable now, though she felt as broken as a shattered piece of glass, a new story was already waiting for her somewhere in the future. She just had to survive long enough to reach it. Zainab arrived in Kumasi on a hot afternoon, carrying 2 suitcases and the weight of her broken dreams. She had chosen this city deliberately because no one here knew her story. No one knew about her failed marriage or the whispers that followed her from Lagos. Here she could be someone new. Here she could try again. Her sister's cousin had a small apartment above a shop in the city center. It was modest, with a single bedroom and a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people to stand in at once. But it was hers, and Zainab felt a small spark of hope when she unlocked the door for the first time. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting golden rectangles on the bare floor. It was a beginning. Finding work was not easy. Zainab had studied education in university, but she had spent the last 5 years of her marriage focused on trying to become pregnant. Her resume had a gap that employers noticed. Still, she persisted. She walked from school to school, speaking to principals and teachers, offering to work without pay just to prove her dedication. Finally, after 3 weeks of rejection, a principal at a small primary school agreed to hire her. She would teach the youngest children, those in the lower primary classes. On her first day of work, Zainab stood in front of 30 eager little faces. The children ranged from 5 to 7 years old, their uniforms crisp despite the heat, their eyes bright with curiosity. When she introduced herself, a small boy raised his hand and asked, "Teacher, do you have children at home?" The question, meant innocently, stabbed her in the heart. But instead of breaking down, Zainab smiled and said, "No, but I have all of you now. You are all my children." She threw herself into her work with a passion that surprised even herself. She created games to help the children learn their letters and numbers. She read stories that made them laugh and imagine fantastic worlds. She noticed which children were struggling and spent extra time with them after school. She celebrated their small victories as if they were her own. The children adored her. They fought to sit next to her during lessons. They drew pictures of her and left them on her desk. They called her Teacher Zainab, with such affection that it made her heart ache. Slowly, teaching became her salvation. Each smile from a student, each correct answer, each hug from a child who had finally grasped a difficult concept. These small moments began to heal her. She realized that motherhood did not have to come from her own body. She was already a mother to dozens of children. She was making a difference in their lives. She was shaping their futures. This was meaningful work. But Zainab was still lonely. In the evenings, she would return to her small apartment and sit alone, listening to the sounds of the city around her. She would prepare simple meals for one, eat them in silence, and then spend her nights reading or writing in a journal. She had started journaling as a way to process her pain. She wrote about her feelings, her fears, her dreams. Slowly, the tone of her entries began to change. The anger and despair gave way to acceptance and hope. About 8 months after arriving in Kumasi, Zainab began volunteering at a community health center near her apartment. She had decided that if she could not be a biological mother, she would help others become better parents. She assisted with prenatal classes, helped with basic health screenings, and provided support to pregnant women. It was while working at this health center that she met Kwame. Kwame came to the center on a Saturday morning with a small girl who could not have been more than 7 years old. Her name was Maya, and she had sad eyes that seemed too old for her young face. Kwame was her father, and he had recently lost his wife to a sudden illness. He was bringing Maya to the center's counseling service because she had become withdrawn and quiet since her mother's death. Zainab was helping at the front desk when they arrived. She noticed the way Kwame held his daughter's hand gently and protectively. She saw the exhaustion in his face, the way he moved as if his body was too heavy for him to carry. She recognized the pain in him because she carried her own pain in exactly the same way. Over the following weeks, Kwame and Maya visited the health center regularly. Zainab would often see them, and she always made a point to say hello to Maya, to ask her about her day, to make her smile. Gradually, Maya began to warm up to her. One day, the little girl brought Zainab a drawing she had made. It was a picture of three people holding hands, with the sun shining down on them from above. Kwame noticed the way his daughter's face lit up when she saw Zainab. He noticed how his daughter began to talk again, to laugh again, to be more like herself. He also noticed his own feelings, which surprised him. He had never thought he would feel attraction to another woman again. His wife's death was still fresh in his heart, still raw and painful. But Zainab had something that drew him to her. A gentle strength, a quiet kindness, a way of seeing the good in people even when they were at their lowest point. One afternoon, when he came to pick up Maya from the health center, Kwame asked Zainab if she would like to have tea with him and Maya at the small cafe next door. It was a simple invitation, but it felt significant to both of them. Over tea and pastries they began to talk. Kwame shared about losing his wife. Zainab shared about her divorce. Neither of them judged the other. Instead, they listened with open hearts, understanding what it meant to have your life torn apart. The tea dates became regular. Sometimes it was just the three of them at the cafe. Sometimes Kwame and Zainab would take Maya to the park, where they would push her on the swings and watch her play with other children. Slowly, something beautiful began to grow between them. It was not a desperate, frantic kind of love. It was a gentle, natural kind of love that grew like a flower opening its petals to the sun. Kwame never once asked Zainab about children. He never once made her feel incomplete for not having them. Instead, he made her feel valued for who she was, her intelligence, her kindness, her strength, her humor. He looked at her as if she was the most interesting person he had ever met. He listened to her when she spoke. He made her laugh. He made her feel alive again. After a year of knowing each other, Kwame asked Zainab to marry him. It was not a grand proposal with an expensive ring. Instead, he took her and Maya to the spot where they had first shared tea together. He knelt down and simply said, "Zainab, I love you. I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" She said yes through tears of joy. They married in a small ceremony with close friends and family. It was a quiet wedding, nothing like Zainab's first marriage, which had been a grand affair with hundreds of guests and all the pressure that came with it. This wedding was about love and commitment, not about fulfilling social expectations. 3 months after they married, Zainab missed her period. At first she was afraid to hope. She had learned that hope could be dangerous. But when the second missed period came, she bought a pregnancy test with shaking hands. 2 pink lines appeared almost immediately. She was pregnant. When she told Kwame, he picked her up and spun her around, tears streaming down his face. "We're going to have a baby," he kept saying over and over. "We're going to have a baby." But the surprise came 6 weeks later during the ultrasound. Not one baby. 2 babies. Twins. Zainab lay on the examination table, staring at the screen in wonder. 2 heartbeats. 2 tiny forms growing inside her. 2 miracles. She reached for Kwame's hand and he squeezed it gently. "Double blessing," he whispered. She felt a peace wash over her that was deeper than any she had ever experienced. After years of pain and rejection, after believing she would never be a mother, she was finally, truly, completely blessed. Zainab's pregnancy was unlike anything she had ever experienced. Her belly grew round and full, and instead of feeling ashamed of it the way she might have during her first marriage, she felt proud. She would rest her hands on her swollen stomach and speak to her babies, telling them stories about their father, about their sister Maya, about the life they would all share together. Kwame treated her like she was made of glass and gold at the same time. He insisted on carrying all the heavy things even though she was pregnant, not ill. He would come home from his work as a carpenter with small gifts: mangoes when she craved them, special soaps to help with her skin, a cushion to support her back while she slept. Every evening, he would sit beside her and place his hand on her belly, waiting to feel the baby's kick. When they moved, his face would light up with such joy that Zainab would laugh. Maya had become a devoted big sister already. The 10-year-old would sit next to Zainab and talk to her belly. "Hello, babies," she would say seriously. "I am your big sister Maya. I will teach you everything I know. I will protect you. I will love you so much." She helped Zainab prepare the nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow color. She made little blankets for the twins and arranged stuffed animals on the cribs. She counted down the days until her siblings would arrive. The women in Zainab's community embraced her during this time. They would bring her food, share their own pregnancy stories, and offer advice. These were the same women who had pitied her during her first marriage, but now they celebrated her. There was no shame attached to her pregnancy because she was married to a good man who loved her. The narrative had changed. Instead of being incomplete, she was now blessed. Zainab continued to work at the school until her 7th month of pregnancy. Her students threw her a small party, bringing her gifts and cards with drawings of babies. The principal gave her paid leave and told her to focus on her health and her family. Even at the health center where she volunteered, the staff treated her with special care, ensuring she rested properly and did not overexert herself. But while Zainab's life was blooming like a garden in the rainy season, something very different was happening back in Lagos. Kofi's business, which had once been so successful, had begun to struggle. It started with a bad business deal that cost him a significant amount of money. Then his major supplier went out of business, and he had trouble finding replacement sources. Other businessmen who had once respected him began to take their business elsewhere. Within a year, his import-export company was bleeding money. The beautiful office in the heart of Lagos's business district had to be closed. The staff he had employed for years had to be let go. His marriage to his second wife, a woman named Adeola, crumbled just as quickly. Kofi had married her only 6 months after divorcing Zainab. She was younger, prettier, and from a wealthy family. Everyone had congratulated him on his new marriage. His mother had been delighted, believing that this young woman would surely give her grandsons. But Adeola became pregnant only twice during their 3 years together, and both pregnancies ended in miscarriage. The third year, despite trying desperately, she could not conceive at all. The irony was so bitter that Kofi could barely swallow it. He had divorced Zainab because he believed she was the problem. He had convinced himself that if he married someone else, someone younger and healthier, he would have the children he wanted. Instead, he found himself in the exact same situation. Adeola began to cry frequently. She felt like a failure. She questioned whether she was woman enough for him. Kofi, instead of being supportive, became cold and distant, just as he had been with Zainab. Within months, Adeola filed for divorce. She moved back to her parents' house, and Kofi learned that she was seeking treatment with a fertility specialist. The news made him wonder. Could it be that the problem was not with the women he married? Could it be with him? Finally, out of desperation and shame, Kofi went to see a doctor. The test took weeks. The results were devastating. The infertility had been his problem all along. His sperm count was very low, and his fertility was severely compromised. A condition he could have discovered years earlier if he had bothered to get tested. Instead, he had blamed Zainab and thrown away his marriage. He had hurt an innocent woman and destroyed her reputation. And for what? For nothing. The realization hit Kofi like a physical blow. He sat in the doctor's office and wept. The doctor, a kind woman, offered him tissues and told him that with proper treatment and medical intervention, he might still be able to father children. But Kofi barely heard her words. All he could think about was Zainab. What had he done to her? A few months later, Kofi ran into an old friend at a restaurant. This friend, Tund, had connections in various cities and always knew the latest gossip. After they had exchanged pleasantries, Tund mentioned casually that he had seen Zainab recently at a health conference in Kumasi. She looked different, Tund said, smiling. Happy, I think. She was with a man and a young girl. They looked very close. And she was pregnant, very pregnant. The words felt like a knife through Kofi's chest. Zainab was pregnant. The same woman he had divorced for not being able to have children was now carrying someone else's child. She had found another man, and that man had given her what Kofi could never give her. And worst of all, she was happy. Kofi's mother had also heard the news through the family network. She confronted her son one afternoon, her voice sharp with accusation. You threw away a good woman for nothing, she said. She was not the problem, you were. And now she has married a better man and is expecting twins. Twins, Kofi. Do you understand what you have lost? For the first time in his life, Kofi truly understood. He had destroyed something beautiful and irreplaceable because of his pride and his weakness. He had let family pressure and social expectations dictate his choices. He had hurt an innocent woman who had done nothing wrong except be married to a man too foolish and too stubborn to get proper medical testing. The knowledge of what he had done ate at him day and night. He could not sleep properly. He could not concentrate on rebuilding his business. He began to drink more than he should. His mother worried about him. His friends noticed the change in him. He had become a shadow of the man he once was. Meanwhile, Zainab continued her journey toward motherhood, unaware of Kofi's suffering and regret. She did not know that the man who had abandoned her was now consumed with guilt. She did not think about him anymore. She had moved on completely, her heart full of love for Kwame and her growing babies. Zainab's pregnancy progressed beautifully. At 8 months she stopped working completely and focused on preparing for the birth. She and Kwame attended prenatal classes together. They learned about labor and delivery. They practiced breathing techniques. They prepared their home and their hearts for the arrival of their twins. One evening as they lay in bed together, Kwame whispered to Zainab, "I am so grateful for you. I am so grateful that my wife died." He immediately corrected himself. "No, that sounded wrong. What I mean is, I am grateful that life brought me to you. I am grateful that Maya has you. I am grateful for these babies. You have made my life complete again." Zainab turned to him in the darkness and kissed him gently. "You saved me," she whispered back. "When I thought my life was over, you gave me a reason to believe again. You gave me a family. You gave me hope." They held each other in the quiet of the night, two people who had both experienced loss and had found healing in each other. Zainab rested her hand on her belly and felt her babies move. These babies were not just the result of her body's ability to conceive. They were the fruit of real love, genuine devotion, and a second chance at happiness. They were the most precious gift she could have ever received. The Lagos Business Summit was being held at the Grand Sheraton Hotel, a massive structure of glass and steel that overlooked the bustling city. Hundreds of business owners, entrepreneurs, and investors had gathered to network, share ideas, and explore new opportunities. Kofi had almost decided not to attend. His business was struggling, and he felt ashamed to face people who had once respected him. But his accountant had insisted that he needed to be visible, needed to show that he was still in the game, still fighting to rebuild. Kofi arrived at the summit in the late afternoon, wearing an expensive suit that hung slightly loose on his frame. He had lost weight over the past months, and his face had become gaunt and tired. He stood in the grand ballroom, holding a glass of wine he did not really want, watching people laugh and talk and make deals. He felt invisible, like a ghost moving through a world that no longer included him. He was considering leaving early when he saw her. Zainab stood across the ballroom and Kofi's breath caught in his throat. He would have recognized her anywhere, but at the same time she was almost unrecognizable. She was radiant. That was the only word for it. Her skin glowed with an inner light. Her hair was styled beautifully, and she wore a flowing, elegant dress that accommodated her very pregnant belly. But it was not just her appearance that had changed. It was the way she carried herself. She moved with confidence and grace. She moved like a woman who knew she was loved and valued. Beside her stood a man who could only be her new husband. He was tall and solid, with the kind of peaceful face that comes from genuine contentment. He had his arm around Zainab's waist, and the way he looked at her made it clear that she was the only thing that mattered to him in that moment. There was a young girl with them too, perhaps 10 or 11 years old, who held Zainab's hand and gazed up at her with obvious adoration. Kofi felt his stomach drop. This was the proof of everything he had been trying not to think about. This was Zainab happy without him. This was Zainab, pregnant and glowing, surrounded by people who clearly loved her. This was the life she should have had with him, the life he had refused to give her. He stood frozen, unable to look away. Part of him wanted to turn and leave, to disappear before she could see him. But another part of him, the part that had been drowning in guilt and regret, needed to speak to her. He needed her to know that he understood what he had done. He needed to apologize, even though he had no right to expect forgiveness. Kofi made his way across the ballroom, weaving through clusters of people. His legs felt unsteady as if they might not support him. When he was about 10 meters away, Zainab happened to glance in his direction. For a moment she did not seem to recognize him. Then understanding dawned in her eyes, followed by surprise, and then a careful neutrality. The man beside her, Kwame, immediately tensed. He could sense that this was someone from Zainab's past, someone significant. His grip on her waist tightened protectively. Kofi came to stand before them and for a moment no one spoke. He looked at Zainab, really looked at her, and he saw how beautiful she was. Not the way he had seen her beauty during their marriage, as a possession, a status symbol, something that was supposed to make him complete. He saw her true beauty now, the strength in her eyes, the peace in her face, the way she carried herself with dignity. "Zainab," he said finally, his voice hoarse. I did not expect to see you here." "Hello, Kofi," Zainab replied calmly, her voice neither warm nor cold. It was the voice of someone speaking to an acquaintance from long ago. Kofi turned to Kwame and nodded respectfully, acknowledging that this man was clearly important to Zainab. Then he looked back at her. "You look well," he said, then immediately felt foolish at such an inadequate statement. "I mean, you look happy. You look truly happy." "I am," Zainab said simply. The silence that followed felt heavy with all the things Kofi wanted to say. Maya, who had been watching this exchange with curiosity, tugged on Zainab's hand. "Who is this man, teacher?" she asked innocently. Zainab glanced at Kwame, then back to Kofi. "An old friend," she said. "From my past." The words hit Kofi harder than any accusation could have. He was not even worth giving a real explanation to. He was simply an old friend from her past. He was part of her history that she had moved past and left behind. "Can we talk?" Kofi asked desperately. "Just for a few minutes?" Kwame started to object, but Zainab placed her hand on his arm. "It is fine," she said to him. Then to Kofi, "We can talk over there, but only for a few minutes. My feet are tired." They moved to a quiet corner of the ballroom, away from the crowd. Kwame and Maya remained within sight but gave them privacy. Kofi began to speak in a rush, the words pouring out of him like water from a broken dam. "I owe you an apology," he said. "1,000 apologies. What I did to you was unforgivable. I blamed you for something that was not your fault. I destroyed our marriage because of my own weakness and my own pride. I let my family pressure me, and I let that pressure destroy something beautiful." Zainab listened without interrupting, her hand resting on her belly. Kofi continued, "I went to see a doctor. I found out that the infertility was my problem. It was always my problem. You did nothing wrong. You were perfect, and I treated you like you were defective. I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too proud to get tested, too stubborn to accept responsibility." Tears began to stream down his face, and he did not try to hide them. "I married someone else, thinking that would solve everything. But I had the same problem with her. And when I finally faced the truth about myself, I could not stop thinking about what I did to you. I heard that you were happy, that you were pregnant, that you married a good man. I'm glad for you, Zainab. I truly am. But I needed you to know that I understand now. I understand what I took away from you." Zainab looked at him with an expression that was neither angry nor sympathetic. It was simply the expression of someone who was looking at a chapter of her life that had been closed and filed away. "Kofi," she said gently, "I forgive you, not for your sake but for mine. I could not move forward if I carried anger against you. So I let it go. I let you go. And I found peace." She rested her hand on her belly again, where her twins were growing. "These babies," she continued, "they are not just the result of my body finally being able to conceive. They are the result of real love. Kwame loves me for who I am, not for what I can give him. He would love me even if we never had children together. That is the difference between him and you, and that is why I am happy." "I know," Kofi said quietly. "I can see it. The way he looks at you. The way he treats you. That is how I should have treated you from the beginning." "Yes," Zainab agreed. "But you did not. And that is in the past now. My life is here with Kwame and Maya and these babies that are coming. That life with you is behind me. I wish you well, Kofi. I hope you find peace with yourself. But we have no future together, and there is nothing to be done about the past." Kofi nodded slowly, understanding that this was goodbye. This was the closure he deserved but did not really want. "I am happy for you," he said. "And I am truly sorry." Zainab gave him a small smile, not unkind but final. "Thank you. Now I need to return to my family. They are waiting for me." She turned and walked back to Kwame and Maya, who immediately embraced her. She did not look back at Kofi. She simply walked back to her life, back to the people who loved her, back to her future. Kofi watched her go, and for the first time he truly accepted that she was lost to him forever. But more importantly, he understood that she was not lost at all. She was found. She was home. And that was enough. The hospital maternity ward was filled with the familiar sounds of life being brought into the world. Monitors beeped rhythmically, machines hummed softly, and somewhere down the hallway, a baby cried its first cry. Zainab lay in the labor room, her body doing what it had been created to do, bringing new life into existence. The pain was intense, more intense than she had ever imagined it could be, but it was a pain with purpose. It was the pain of creation. Kwame sat beside her, holding her hand throughout the entire labor. When the pain became unbearable and she cried out, he did not flinch or look away. Instead, he wiped her forehead with a cool cloth, whispered words of encouragement, and reminded her to breathe. "You are so strong," he kept saying. "You are doing so well. Our babies are almost here." For 12 hours, Zainab labored. The nurses came and went, checking her progress, offering her water and words of comfort. The doctor, a kind woman named Dr. Mensa, encouraged her to push when the time came. "You are almost there," the doctor said. "One more big push. I can see the head of your first baby." With a final, tremendous effort, Zainab pushed with everything she had. The pain exploded into something beyond words, and then suddenly, it released. A baby's cry filled the room, angry and loud and absolutely perfect. A girl. Their daughter was born at 2:17 in the afternoon. The nurse cleaned the baby quickly and placed her on Zainab's chest. The little girl was covered in vernix and blood, her eyes squeezed shut, her tiny fists clenched. Zainab looked down at her and felt something shift in her soul. This was her daughter. This small, perfect creature was part of her, part of Kwame, a new human being that had not existed before this moment. "Hello, my baby girl," Zainab whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Welcome to the world." But the birth was not finished. There was still a second baby to come. Zainab's body continued to work, and within 15 minutes she was pushing again. This time it was faster. A boy emerged into the world, screaming his arrival loudly. Her son. Her beautiful son. When the doctor placed him on her chest beside his sister, Zainab felt overwhelmed by emotion. She had 2 healthy children. After years of believing this would never happen, after being blamed and shamed and rejected for not being able to conceive, she now had 2 perfect babies in her arms. Kwame cried openly, making no attempt to hide his tears. He kissed Zainab's forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You did it," he said over and over. "You did it. Our babies are here. Our beautiful babies are here." The doctor and nurses gave Zainab time to bond with her newborns before they took them to be weighed and measured and checked thoroughly. The girl weighed 5 pounds and 3 ounces. The boy weighed 5 pounds and 8 ounces. Both were healthy and strong. Both had 10 fingers and 10 toes. Both were perfect. Later that evening, after Zainab had been moved to a comfortable recovery room, Maya was allowed to visit. The 10-year-old walked in slowly, unsure of what to expect, and then she saw her new siblings in the clear plastic bassinets beside her mother's bed. Her eyes grew wide with wonder. "They are so small," Maya whispered, approaching the bassinets carefully as if they might break if she moved too quickly. "Come," Zainab said, patting the bed beside her. "Come meet your brother and sister." Maya climbed onto the bed, and Zainab guided her hand to gently touch each baby's head. "This is Amma," Zainab said, pointing to the girl. "And this is Kai. They are your brother and sister. You are their big sister. You are going to teach them so many things." Maya's face lit up with pure joy. She had spent months preparing for this moment, painting the nursery, making blankets, imagining what it would be like to have younger siblings. Now they were here, and the reality was even better than she had imagined. "I love them already," she said seriously. "I love them so much." Kwame stood nearby, one arm around his daughter, the other hand resting gently on his wife's shoulder. Looking at the 3 females who meant everything to him, the 2 newborns and his daughter who had welcomed them so completely, he felt his heart might burst with happiness. This was his family. This was his life. This was everything he had hoped for when he first asked Zainab to marry him. The first night in the hospital was exhausting. Zainab did not sleep much. Instead, she spent the night watching her babies sleep, marveling at their tiny fingers and their perfect little faces. Every so often one of them would stir or make a small sound, and Zainab would check to make sure they were breathing, that they were real, that this was not some beautiful dream. At one point in the early morning when it was still dark outside and the hospital was quiet, Zainab held both babies in her arms. They had been fed and changed and settled down to sleep. She looked at them and thought about her journey. She thought about the pain of her first marriage, the shame of being blamed for something that was not her fault, the loneliness of those early days in Kumasi. She thought about how close she had come to giving up, how dark things had seemed when she first left Lagos. She thought about the moment she decided to volunteer at the health center, which had led her to meet Kwame. She thought about how one small decision to help others had changed the entire trajectory of her life. "You changed everything," she whispered to her sleeping babies. "You brought me here, to this moment, to this joy. Thank you for choosing me as your mother." Tears of gratitude rolled down her cheeks. These were not tears of pain or sadness. They were tears of overwhelming emotion, a mixture of love, relief, pride, and profound gratitude for the second chance life had given her. 3 days later, Zainab and her twins came home from the hospital. Kwame had prepared the house beautifully. There were flowers in every room. The nursery was perfect, with soft lighting and gentle music playing. He had even prepared special meals so that Zainab could rest and focus on recovering and feeding her babies. Friends and family came to visit, bringing gifts and well wishes. Zainab's sister came from Lagos and stayed for 2 weeks, helping with household chores and caring for the babies when Zainab needed to sleep. The women from the community came with food and advice. Everyone celebrated the birth of the twins. But the most moving part was watching Kwame with their babies. He was a natural father. He changed diapers without complaining. He warmed bottles at 3 in the morning without grumbling. He sang to them in his off-key voice and danced around the living room holding them. He looked at them with a love so pure that it made Zainab's heart ache with happiness. One evening, about 2 weeks after the birth, Zainab was sitting in the living room nursing Amma while Kwame held Kai and watched him sleep. Maya was doing her homework at the table nearby. The house was quiet and peaceful, filled with the simple sounds of family life. "I was thinking," Kwame said softly, "about names. I know we already chose Amma and Kai, but I was wondering if we should also give them middle names. Something that means something special to us." Zainab looked at him thoughtfully. "What did you have in mind?" "For Amma," he said, "I was thinking Grace. Amma Grace. She is our grace, our blessing, our second chance." Zainab felt tears prick her eyes. It was perfect. Amma Grace. It captured exactly what this baby meant to her. "And for Kai," Kwame continued, "I was thinking Victory. Kai Victory. Because he is our victory over all the things that tried to break us. He is proof that love wins. That truth wins. That goodness wins." Zainab reached over and kissed her husband. "I love those names," she said. "Amma Grace and Kai Victory. They are perfect." That night, as Zainab lay in bed between her sleeping husband and her sleeping daughter Amma Grace, she thought about how far she had come. She thought about the woman she had been when she left Lagos, broken, ashamed, convinced that her life was over. She thought about the journey that had led her to Kumasi, to teaching, to volunteering, to meeting Kwame, to falling in love, to becoming pregnant with twins. She thought about Kofi and the pain he had caused her. But she did not think about him with anger anymore. She thought about him with a kind of sad understanding. He had made his choices and she had made hers. His choices had led him down a path of regret and pain. Her choices had led her here, to this bed in this house, surrounded by the people who loved her for exactly who she was. Zainab placed her hand on her heart and whispered a prayer of gratitude. She had survived heartbreak. She had found true love. She had discovered that her worth was not determined by her ability to conceive, but by her capacity to love, to teach, to inspire, to grow. She had learned that a family was not just about blood relations, but about the people who chose to stand by you, who believed in you, who celebrated you. As sleep finally came to her, Zainab smiled. She was home. She was loved. She was whole. And nothing could ever take that away from her.